Welcome to the Back of the Gap podcast.
Oh my god.
Episode 1. We'll call it that. We'll retroactively call the other one episode 0.
Really?
I'm fine with that.
It's been a little while. 2 years to be exact. We're recording this 2 years on the day, basically.
We tried to do this last year. It's never worked out.
We did. We planned on doing the 1 year anniversary. And I think what had happened is it was like a week later, I just looked at my calendar. I was like, oh, wait, we missed it. And then we just gave up.
Well, busy times.
Busy times.
Yeah.
What a seamless segue
I'm telling
got
you.
going here.
It's
We
crazy.
just
It's kind of like, it's not like a retrospective. It's like we've changed also in 2 years' time.
Yes.
Dude, honestly, that's thinking back about who I was at the recording of that podcast versus now, I'm like, wow.
I mean, in 2 years, at that point, you didn't have the job you had now.
Dude.
I had not started college yet.
Oh my
That is
gosh.
true.
Jonathan, you were
I
still
was-
in school.
Yeah, I had.
That's
Yeah, it was that
crazy.
summer we just got back from a camp,
Yeah.
and I had like another quarter left, so like another 10 weeks of school.
Yeah, and Ware was talking. He was like, Luke's just better than me. And I'm like, no.
When did I say that?
In the podcast, because you were
remember that.
like, he graduated in 3 years, and I'm
That's
still
right, I
in
remember
school.
that.
Yeah. So you think
I'm
2
bald.
years ago,
I have
you're
glasses.
bald, glasses.
I still have a stutter.
I still have a luscious beard.
I don't think you had facial hair back then. I think
That
you were
is
still
true.
working on it.
Yeah,
You may have had the goatee rocking at that point.
I probably did.
Probably off and on.
We're definitely in a better room.
Yes.
For sure. And let me tell you, the AC quality.
Let me tell you
So
what,
much
audio listeners, love you to death. I know you can't see this, but the room itself is so much nicer. Before we had this, round table that was, you should not have mounted a mic to those things.
We got a bigger budget in within the past 2 years.
That's right. Our budget has expanded tremendously from $0 to $0. It's the joy of borrowing someone else's set.
We're just bumming off of everyone else.
America.
So yeah, considering we've been gone for the past 2 years, we figured we want to come and talk about how to balance your life and why we didn't fit the podcast into our life.
I would say that's been, at least this is just outside perspective, in terms of all three of our lives, this concept of time and managing and fitting everything in has been an area that all three of us have had to grow in a lot
Yes.
in the past 2 years.
Yeah, I wouldn't call us experts on time management, but
Not at all.
I mean, you look at how differently our lives look from 2 years ago to now. Like, all of us have had to learn something about how to pick and choose what we're going to keep and what's going to have to go. And
yeah, for sure.
it's been tough, but it's been, I think, a good experience.
I think so. Would you agree?
Yes. No.
Oh.
Well, as y'all were talking, I was thinking back for the past 2 years I think of like the church we go to, and when we first did this 2 years ago, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure my head's down so it picks up all my voice.
You're good.
How I started volunteering for our youth, and just how even the stuff I do now, where there's more trust that's been given to me. There's more stuff that I'm
in that
involved
leadership role.
Yeah. And it's like back then it was just, hey, you're just leading a small group, right?
Sure.
And now it's much more than that. And even back then I was also still in school, as we mentioned, not having a full-time job, and not even in youth. I volunteer in other things too outside of that, and so I have to balance all of that. So it is a very great topic to discuss and talk about.
Yeah. A little loud there.
Well, we said it at the same time. That's why. I agree. One of the things that now I'm not in school, and so currently I'm doing my continuing education for my license. And it's like the process of getting my license was miserable to me because I'd been out of school for a while as in like a year maybe. And I was like, dude, I don't want to do a lick of studying. And it's a tough test, like one of the hardest that you can take. So like I had to crack down and be like, I'm going to sit down and I've got to do this. Because there was multiple times I know that we had talked like, no, I can't hang out.
Yeah.
I'm studying. And miserable. Took the test, passed it, flying colors. Not really. We did what we had to do and we got out. But now I'm in that continuing education, and it's just that tiniest glimpse of like what it is to be back in school, and I'm like,
Yeah.
and so like there's other licenses that I want to get, but the thought of having to study and do that and sit down and grind and balance everything else sounds miserable to me. So like my point is, you take people that are doing master's degrees right now that have a family, kids, they're managing a full-time job. Like, I'm like, man, hat off to you, because
Yeah.
should not be me.
Yeah, I've been asked multiple times since I graduated, because I got a bachelor's, and multiple times I graduated also within accounting. So the realm of, hey, you're going to get your master's, or are you going back to get your CPA? And stuff I've thought about, and I said, heck that, I ain't doing that.
Dude, that CPA is tough.
Yeah.
I would not want to do that at all.
And, you know, for me, I'm still in school. I just finished my, you know, sophomore year, and it's definitely a different experience where I have free time, but it's all in sporadic bursts, and
It's not consistent.
It's difficult to find motivation to do the things that I have to do, and then also to try to schedule in things that I want to do, because it's such an inconsistent schedule.
Yeah.
You know, going from month to month. Especially, I mean, this last school year I worked 2 part-time jobs as well as doing classes, and that was like I have time, but like I need like to be able to say, yeah, we can hang out on like 2 days notice.
Yeah.
And that does not work for people.
Isn't that weird? Like, as you grow older, like, you got to have that 2 to like a week days notice before you're like, yep, we're good to go.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know it's that way. Like, for me, it's almost like a week. Like, if you text me a couple days before, no, I can't. There's something planned.
Mm-hmm.
It's like weird how much you become a planner. Because, like, I feel like I'm an okay planner in certain ways. Like, I know my consistency in terms of my weekly schedule. And then I know, okay, well, these things are going to happen on top of that. And so it's like I'm constantly going through that scheduling. But at the same time, it's like I've got all this flexibility. I can do what I want. And now it's like I can't. Nope. I'm sorry. And so you have to, one, for me, I've had to learn how to say no to things, which is very hard. And then 2, like, I've had to figure out, okay, well, if I want to say yes to this, I'm saying no to something else. So what do I actually want to do, you know, and what is more beneficial for me and for others, and, you know, what is actually honoring God. And so, I don't know, it's just, there's been a lot of things that I've thought about that I never thought about before until current stage of life.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. Saying
You are the worst.
well, I looked over to Joey, and Joey was like,
I just started smiling. I was going to say something, and I was like, wait, no, maybe he has to say something.
It's hard to say no in general, but especially when it's something that you've done a lot, and someone's just expecting you to say yes to volunteer for it again, and you feel like you're just letting someone down by telling them no.
Man, where were we?
And that's the worst feeling, is when someone asks you that you've done on a consistent basis, and you're like, I'm sorry, I just can't. And then you see the look in their eyes. It's like, man, they're like a dog that just got ran over or something. Like I said, my truck.
Where has hurt some people, man?
Dude, that one's big. And also, like, there was a time where I did say yes to too many things, and like then I had to go back on something I'd already committed to. That's even worse.
Yeah,
that truly is the worst.
So I think let's talk about how do you say no to something?
Say no.
Man, that I dare to say no to drugs.
I've never done a drug. So, like, in terms of learning how to say no to something, the first thing I've had to learn how to do is look at my schedule. And so for me, I've learned I've got 2 different schedules. One is my work schedule, and the other is my personal life schedule. And so a lot of times someone will ask me something in pertaining to several weeks, a month in advance, and it'll be a weekend. And I tell them, maybe, but let me look at my schedule. And typically that means I got to look at my work schedule because it can be a weekly, something that happens in the middle of the week, like a work day, right? And it's like where I'm at with my current job now, there's enrollments I'm going to, there's a little bit of travel involved. There's more responsibility in terms of the day-to-day. And so a lot of times people are asking me to do something, and it'll be a men or women's retreat, and they need some help, some volunteers, whatever. And I've had to learn, okay, I can't do 2 or 3 retreats at the same time. Like, not feasible. Yeah. Can't do it. And that time commitment is just not something that I can give. So, like, most recently, I had to say no to 2 retreats, not being fully involved necessarily, but I've had to say, this is the one that I can do. I can't do those other 2. And, you take me a year or 2 years ago, I never, would have even considered saying no. Like, it wasn't even an option. But even still now, the times that those retreats were happening, work-wise, just physically, I just couldn't do it. There's too much business happening right now. So,
yeah. One thing that's helped me is I want to say I'm a blunt person, but I'm very much as the least information that I can give, the better. But I've had to switch out of that, where it went from just saying no, because I can call it very hurt. It can be very hurtful to just say no and walk off.
Sure.
I've had to explain myself more, and I'm lucky because we have a great church body here where I'll explain myself, because it's better to say no and give an explanation for it than to say yes and not give your best.
Yeah. Dude, there's a scripture about that. So there's the 2 sons, and the father asked the sons, hey, go and work in the vineyard. One of the sons says, yes, I will, and doesn't. Then the other says, no, I won't, and then goes and actually works in it.
Yeah.
And so I think they're asking Jesus, which one of the sons did the will of the father? Or Jesus is asking the question, I can't remember which. They're like, well, the son that actually went and did it, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
And so that's where I've had to improve. And what's made it easier for me, it's a mixture of explaining why I'm saying no. Because if I have a real reason for it of why I just cannot do this, I'm honoring the situation in doing so. And I'm honoring that person telling them no, instead of saying yes and not giving my best for it. And I've also had to get over that hump of, because I feel like I like to please people a lot, and I don't like to let people down. And I've had to give her that hump of, if they're still upset after I've explained this and why I can't do this, and they're upset, it's not really my fault at that point. If that makes sense.
Sure.
Well, that's kind of on them now.
You picked that up from me, for the record.
Where does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I follow. So would y'all say that you would consider yourself to be a people pleaser?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. It depends on what the context is.
Okay.
If it's the context of, if it's something I'm not really involved in, and someone so say our church is doing some special retreat that I've never done before, and someone calls me up and I'm busy, and I say no. It's very easy at that point for me to say no. But if it's something that I do on a regular basis, where I'm boom, hey, I am the guy that that's on that list of volunteers.
Yeah.
Saying no, because here recently, our church actually had a camp to go to, and I said no. That was very hard for me to do.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy that whatsoever. I missed out a whole week of camp, because not only did I hate missing, but also, it's not just for our students, but as a volunteer as well, to grow within your relationship, to kind of get away for an entire week. Yep. Where I missed out on that, where I knew that's something that I'm kind of known for the past few years of doing. So that was very hard for me to say no.
Yeah. As far as people pleasing goes, I think yes, it is something that I've had to work on, because it's so easy for me to be like, yeah, I can make it to this event. I can show up for this time slot. Yeah. But I've had to understand, me being present for an event is not me being involved.
Yeah.
And, with our, and for some context, some of you may have not heard of these retreats that we're talking about. Our church does these men's and women's retreat where, if we team it, you basically give up a night a week for about 2 to 3 months leading up. But it's more than just that time slot. And I had to say no recently because I can make it on a Tuesday night from 6 to 7 p.m. But outside of that, if I don't have the capacity to give more of myself in that, well, then I'm just wasting my time and everybody else's time because I'm showing up and not actually putting in, my full self outside of that, 1 hour meeting.
Yeah. And I would say, like, for myself, I wouldn't fully consider myself a people pleaser, but I definitely have some tendencies that lean that way. I genuinely want everyone to be happy with me and, whatever level of involvement I have with them, There's a lot of times I feel like, well, I've been asked to do this thing by this person and they're counting on me, So then if I say no, well, then I'm letting them down, right? Because whether it's playing music for an event or whether it's helping, a lot of times people will be like, hey, can you come help move this heavy object? And I'm like, when is it? And they're like, it's on a Saturday at 10 a.m. I'm like, brother, no, I am out.
Moving is the worst.
Dude, okay, so if you have a truck and you're a male that's like semi, healthy, corn-fed, if you will, dude, you're top of everyone's list.
Yep.
On top of that, be a pastor's kid and everyone knows who you are. It's like, oh my gosh. But anyways, something I've had to learn how to balance recently has been a relationship, and man, I did not know how tough that was going to be because it was pretty much shocking to me how much I had to say no to other things in order to prioritize someone else's needs, but also growing in that relationship and the level of intimacy that we share. I think that one of the toughest things has been to say no to some of my closest friends and the time spent with them, because it'll be, hey, last minute, you want to do whatever, and I'm like, I can't. And that has been really tough because your heart is like, I want to do both. I can't have both. So which do I choose? And so there's times whenever I have to gauge it, like on a week to week, it's like, okay, how much time have I spent with her this week? How much, energy have I poured out? Like, is she in a good place for me to be able to say, hey, is it okay if I go and do this, right?
Yeah.
And it's not asking for permission, but it's out of respect for her, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that I've also had to learn about is like, I'm not asking her permission to do something, but I respect her enough to actually ask what her opinion is,
Yeah.
And so there's a large portion of my life where I was like, boy, if you ask for permission, you are whipped, like, whoosh. And not quite the case, right? And I don't know, it's just very, very different. I think that God's taught me a tremendous amount about being selfless and just how selfish I am, and I think he'll continue to do that. It's been one of the most, I don't know, it's so filled with teaching. Like, if you just recognize this is God showing me something, you're going to learn so much. Like, there's so much to be learned, and yet you feel like, man, I hadn't even scratched the surface because I can't even I cannot imagine what it is, one, to be married, like, right? And then on top of that, have kids, have one kid, have multiple kids. I'm like, dude, there's no way you can give them enough attention to where they're like, oh, I'm loved, like, golly. So I don't dread that, but it's just, I'm becoming more and more aware of how easy it is to not give a child or your spouse the attention that they need and deserve. And then, like, translate that to God. Like, because of my romantic relationship, in ways, there's times whenever I prioritize that over God, which is an idol, right?
Yeah.
So whenever I start doing that, then the actual romantic relationship isn't as good as what it was, and then my relationship with God isn't what it was, and then my relationship with everyone else isn't what it was. And so it's just like this spiral that you go into of, well, now that you've put something above God, Satan has his clutches on you, and you've already set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, it's definitely a tap dance between the different phases of life, the different parts of life, because it's, to me, from what I've seen from talking to others, my personal life, I feel like we get in this mindset that I can only do one thing. And I think it's perfectly healthy to do multiple things, but given the right time for each thing.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that.
Because I think, I feel like in church culture, it's easy to fall into that trap of, well, I feel bad because I'm not volunteering, which I think we should volunteer.
Yeah.
So I want to set that baseline. Like, everybody should volunteer in some capacity. But also be willing to say, okay, I need some time away a little bit, where you have personal time, you have your service time, you have your personal time with God, where it's like, it's all these things and knowing how to manage all of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that, growing up, there was somewhat of an expectation of, oh, this person is, a good, Christian. They're here every time the doors are open.
Yeah.
And that phrase was used a lot. And that's okay when church is reserved to just Sunday and Wednesday night and your occasional event. But, over the past couple of years, our church has grown to the point where there's something happening practically every day.
Yeah.
And you just cannot be involved every single waking hour of the day.
And something that I encountered basically at the timeline of our last episode, I would say I was probably at the physical location of the church, which I was working, but like 4 to 5 nights a week, right?
Yeah.
And that was killing me. And what I found that I did was I substituted relationship with busyness. And so I was like, well, God, here I am being a student, studying, learning, growing in knowledge, but I wasn't building the relationship like I should have. And you can't tell yourself, oh, I'm doing all these things to know God and actually know him, right?
Yeah.
It has to be your relationship with him. And so recently I've had to be like, no, I can't be a part of that. And I could not sustain being at the church 4 to 5 nights a week. And I would say the biggest thing that God's been teaching me across the past 2 years has been what it is to rest in him and what does godly rest look like. Mm-hmm. So that has been something that's been very different because you think, oh, I'm not doing something. And then you find yourself scrolling mindlessly on the interwebs or whatever social media for hours and hours and hours. I know that's something that we've talked about a lot. Yeah. And just how much time is wasted there. And afterwards, you're just drained. And there's so much scientific study that's been done about the effects of social media and how our brain changes in the dopamine receptors and how that stuff is so packed full with information. Your brain can't take in all the information that it's given in a day if you're just scrolling and doing everything else. So there's times whenever I have to literally just put my phone down and be like, I'm not touching that, or actually put in some guidelines for myself.
Yeah, I think, you will definitely learn to trust God more. And if you haven't, at some point you will learn, because when you volunteer in church, there's going to come a point where people will recognize your service and they will put you in a spot that you won't feel that you're qualified for, if that makes sense, where it's man, what have they got me into? Where I've been voluntold to do this thing. And I'm I don't know what the heck I'm doing.
So do you have an example for that?
Yes, I'm going straight into this. So at our church currently, I help a lot with our youth. And we had a guy over our music within our youth, and he recently stepped down and left. And I also play within our youth praise team. I play drums, and our youth pastor said, hey, I need you to take over this. And I don't have a fat clue about music. I can play drums a little bit. But as far as how to lead a band, how to make people better at what they're doing, have no idea.
Yeah.
And I've had to really trust God, saying, God, oh God, please, in your infinite wisdom,
Yeah.
I pray this works out. I remember our first practice we get in a like quick side story. It was horrific. Our first practice, like our first scheduled practice. I mean, when it was like the definition of just loud noise. I mean, whenever you read that verse about whenever Paul's writing, I think in Romans about being a clanking cymbal.
Yeah.
Like I just imagine that because it was just the epiphany of just like loud noise happening.
That's funny.
But the good thing is I was equipped where I knew tempo, I knew timing. So I could tell them, all right, on 1 and 2 and do stuff like that. So it worked out. So to make a long story short, it worked out, and we got a guy helping now where his time's been freed up, where he's more equipped, where like I'm still working in that capacity, and really not only has it taught me to trust God more within that, it's made me a better leader too, and how to talk and lead, and how to how to communicate with people too, because there's times where someone's going to mess up.
Yeah.
And how do you tell them that, hey, that doesn't sound good, we need to try something else? It's made me better in that capacity too, because sometimes I'll just tell you how I think.
Yeah.
It can be very hurtful to do that. So it's helped me in different ways. Yes.
I think whenever you look at like what you're talking about, God prepares us for something in that, right? And you've grown a lot in certain areas, right? So I don't know whether you've considered this, but what do you think that God is preparing you for and growing you in those areas? Like some of the lessons that you've learned and the things that he's taught you, like how do you think he's preparing you for something else?
Well, I definitely plan on going into ministry at some point. I've prayed a lot about that, and that's definitely helped me within that.
Yeah.
Where God has, because it was actually,
You did it again.
Y'all did it again. But shortly after, and I'll talk to y'all both about this, but shortly after I made that decision of, like God's called me to ministry, a door hasn't opened yet for me to go down that road.
Yeah.
But that, literally when that decision was made, where God's calling me to that, how that happened like immediately.
Yeah.
And that there's something right there that God's used to help me within that, help me be more confident what I'm doing and leading others too. And also that, and being involved in small groups and going to camp and being a family group leader, all these things that God's put into my life to help me for that.
Yeah. Did my camera turn off? There you go.
There it is.
Okay, as I was saying before,
Not sponsored by Canes.
God does not. What was I saying? God does not call the qualified. God qualifies the
Yeah.
called. Cheesy quotes are the best. Did you get ketchup? Such an L.
Couldn't be me.
Wow.
But no, I love that quote though.
I like that quote a lot too, and it's kind of a cheesy quote, but I mean, you really do have to look at different people who've been called to ministry across time, and even throughout Scripture, these characters we look at and we're like, man, I wish I could be like such and such, and it's like, you absolutely can. You just have to be willing to do what God has for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
God does not give you your whole life plan in one sitting. He gives you small steps that you have to be obedient on to receive further instruction.
Yeah. And Scripture confirms that quote, right? That's not that quote isn't in Scripture, but what Scripture says is God uses the weak and foolish things of this world to confound the wise.
Yeah.
And like my dad says that all the time, right? Because he uses himself as the example. And I think it's very true. Like whenever we begin to see ourselves truly through the eyes or the lens of God, it's like, man, how foolish actually are we? Like we get so prideful and arrogant in our human nature. We're like, oh, I know all these things. It's like, you know nothing. Whenever you compare yourself to a holy God, you are nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely done weak and foolish things in my life.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
I think also having the right intentions is important for volunteering. We kind of talked about people pleasing before, but you can't just show up to something and say, oh, I'm going to do this, just to seek others' approval, because
Yep.
if we're not doing these things, for the glory of God, then sure, it's a good thing, in the moment, I guess, but
And I would even say I do truly believe that like that is an idol that's putting something above God.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, that's just straight up pride. Like, it's putting yourself
Yeah.
above God.
Yeah.
I want to be seen as, the person who is here every time, not I want to serve God.
And I can say for myself, there's been a lot of times that I've said yes to something in terms of service, right, that you mask as I'm serving God.
Yeah.
And the reason that I said yes is because I felt like I was the most qualified person to do it. Like, I legitimately believed if someone's going to be able to do it, like, it's going to be me and be able to do the best job.
Yeah.
So in me saying that, I edged someone else out and was like, no, they can't do that. They're not qualified enough.
Yeah.
And, maybe you were the most qualified, but that person may have needed the opportunity to grow through that experience.
Sure. And
right?
maybe it wasn't like truly God's will for me to do that.
Yeah.
And my sinful nature just busted up in there and said, no, Luke can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if we're not praying about these things we're supposed to be volunteering at, maybe this is the only opportunity you see right now, but if you accept it, then 2 weeks later, there's this opportunity that, well, I've already committed to this, I can't.
Yeah. I've had that happen
Yeah.
multiple times.
I think also what's important too is when you're in the moment of doing whatever service project that you're doing, having that willingness to say, hey, here's someone that I think needs to do this instead of me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And like allowing that person.
Giving others space and room to grow.
Yeah.
That's something I've had to learn too, because if I try to control something so much, okay, I'm the only person that can do this. Like, one, it makes me more prideful, but two, it never gives someone else the opportunity to grow themselves. And so, like, one of the things that's been focused on heavily in men's retreat is like, let's get some people in some different roles that haven't been in those roles, so that way they can grow themselves, and so that there's a little bit more of a streamlined process of, okay, who's done this and who can teach someone else to do this as well. And so, like, even down to like the basics of serving and doing like a basic act at church, like cleaning up after an event or something like that. Like, I have learned that what happens a lot of times with our church is I'm a point of contact. So a minister or someone that's over something reaches out to me, hey, can you help with this? And can you get some other people lined out to do so? I'm like, yes. Okay. So then I text these few people and then I stop there. But I never consider someone beyond that group of people.
Yeah.
And then what happens is someone goes, well, I never have the opportunity to serve because no one asked me, right? One, there's some responsibility on that person to get out there and say, hey, what can I do? But two, if I knew that person and knew some of their heart, knew, hey, maybe this person can get this opportunity, maybe take some stress off of someone else that's constantly serving.
Straight up, bro. Stop texting me to clean up.
I said, where were we? I'm sorry, but
I'm just joking.
Whenever I've never really considered that to be a thing I should approach prayerfully, whereas I really should. Like, those things may seem minuscule, but how much can I help someone else grow in their spiritual relationship with God and help them in growing in their service to God and saying, hey, here's an opportunity for you,
Especially, I mean, these things happen constantly, as far as like the example you brought of cleaning up after some event, where, I mean, it's just something that we don't even think about as being a service opportunity. It's just like, oh, we have to do this now. And
there's a lot of things I would say in life that we don't consider, like, we don't consider those things that we can do to honor God. Whereas Scripture says that, like, work all things as if you are working for the Lord. And there's a lot of times that I don't translate that into my day-to-day life, into my job, and into the small, mundane parts of service like that, where it's like, I'm a very diligent person in a lot of ways, simply because that's who I am. My personality is geared towards that. My life experience is geared towards that. But I haven't considered, like, sometimes my whys aren't in line with my actions. My actions can be correct, but my reason for the action isn't correct, which means the action itself doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I was talking to our Well, it was actually a conversation with our youth pastor and our discipleship pastor here. We were talking about how like people's perspectives on ministry or on ministers. Did I say that? Ministers? Ministers. Yes, I pronounce words weird.
Yes.
I do. And I remember for a long time, my perspective was always, well, they just probably just sit around an office and just read their Bible to like prepare a lesson.
Yeah.
But the more you get ingrained within like church, you start to like, it's way more than that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And like they're way overworked.
And I'll say this because I've heard my dad say it a lot. Like, there's actually a few times you get paid to sit there and teach. You know, like,
Yeah.
and I'm not a minister, but like those ministers don't really get paid to just go teach a class.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And like, so the way I've always, when you grow up in life, it's like the older you get, the more context you get on life, to where you get more and more responsibility the more you grow up in life.
Yeah.
And you have a bigger appreciation for, man, there's so many little things I never had to take care of because I was a kid and I couldn't do this stuff whenever I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
And now, like the stuff I know now compared to whenever I was like 6. Whenever I was 6, when my parents would tell me about, you know, the little things and how they're so important, I thought they were dumb because I was like,
Classic.
yeah, because like my 6-year-old brain just couldn't comprehend like all of the little things that our parents do.
Yeah.
And it goes with that like in church world too, where it's like if you don't really volunteer, like you have a very small view on church, but the more you get ingrained into it, the more you're like, man, there's so many little things I can help out with, so many little things that our church does type provide, not only for us, but for our I struggle with this
Community?
word. Community, yes, community.
Yeah, and you like spiritual maturity and physical maturity are very comparable in ways, right? You can apply some of the same concepts to them. You know, thinking like a child. You know, there's lots of scripture that deals with a childlike faith, but also in the sense of, you know, you should grow up and you should separate yourself from your parents. You know, and so I feel like that lends itself towards what you're saying. Like, you have to get out of some of that childish thinking, even spiritually speaking, of like, oh, well, that's not my job, or maybe someone else has already taken care of that, or, you know, I really don't have to do anything, right?
Yeah.
I can just sit here and be fine.
Yeah, so I think that's about all we want to say. To wrap it up, as your takeaway, analyze how you're spending your time and what areas of life you need to maybe give up time to put somewhere else for service. Or if you're too committed to being busy, find something that you can take away so you can truly rest in God and actually build a personal relationship with God, not just, you know, showing up and serving all the time. That's all we got from the Back in the Gap podcast. We'll see you next time.
Where were we? I think that's a W.